The Mainland Adventure, written and told by Kiefer Adams. Thomas the Tank Engine loved working on the island of Sodor. No matter where he was, he always felt like he was being really useful. Sometimes you could find him working on his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle. Other times you will see him helping out on the main line. And on the rare occasion, Thomas would get to make a special delivery to the mainland. But, as he was a small engine, he would only go as far as Barrow, which, as the other engines called, the station at the end of the line. Thomas had been working very hard in recent weeks, and the Fat Controller had a special reward for him one early morning. Thomas was at Tidmouth Sheds with Percy and Emily. He had been wondering about his reward for a few days. But now, as the Fat Controller arrived in his car, Thomas would find out what he was going to receive. "Good morning, Thomas," the Fat Controller began. "As you know, you've worked very hard on my railway, and I have organised a special treat for you." Percy and Emily looked at Thomas, who was bracing himself for what would come. "I have a small goods train that needs to go to Barrow," said the Fat Controller. "Their yards require an engine to do some shunting tomorrow. I have asked them if they would be okay if you went up there to help them, Thomas. Would you like to?" "Yes, sir," gasped Thomas in surprise. "I'd be delighted." "Beg pardon, sir," inquired Emily, "but what about Thomas's work?" "Don't worry about that," said the Fat Controller. "Percy and Toby will look after Thomas's branch line while he's away, and I'm sure you and the others will help too." "Oh, yes, sir, we will, sir," said Percy. Thomas was beyond words. "Now then," the Fat Controller said, "you best hurry to the docks, Thomas. Edward is just preparing your train as we speak." Yes, sir, right away, sir," said Thomas hastily. With a good luck from Percy and best wishes from Emily, Thomas set off for the docks. He still couldn't believe he was going to spend the night on the mainland. Edward had just finished marshalling the last of the trucks into place when Thomas arrived at the docks. But the excited mood he had been in had now turned into constant worry. "Hello, Thomas," Edward greeted as he backed down onto the train. "For someone who's going to the mainland, I thought you'd be excited. You've always wanted to see the world." "Well, this is a little different," said Thomas. "I haven't been on the mainland since I used to work in the harbour of Brighton." "I'm sure you'll be all right," reassured Edward. "That's the thing," said Thomas. "I'm truly honoured to take this train, but why would Barrow want me to do shunting? They must have an engine of their own." "Maybe they need some extra help," suggested Edward. "But either way, Thomas, I know you'll do well and make the Fat Controller proud. You've made me proud already, going off to the mainland. I wish I could go." "I wish you were coming with me," said Thomas. "You'll be back tomorrow," said Edward. "I wish you the best of luck." "Thank you," said Thomas. He was feeling a little better, but still nervous. Once everything was ready, Thomas set off out of the docks. Edward gave him 3 cheers with his whistle and wished that he'd be back home safely. Before long, Thomas and his train were out of sight. Thomas found that the other railway was quite a journey. He had done it a few times and was back home within moments, but this felt different than the other trips he had done in the past. As the Fat Controller had said, he was only pulling a small goods train, but it felt quite important as Thomas puffed along the line. He crossed over the bridge that connected Sodor to the mainland, and was soon on unfamiliar territory. At first, it felt strange to be back on the mainland. As Thomas had said, he used to shunt in the harbours long ago, before he even sported his blue coat of paint. But ever since Thomas had been on Sodor, the mainland had changed. There weren't many engines as there were before, and even if there were, most of them were diesels, which made Thomas nervous. The sun was just setting when Barrow finally came into view. At last, tired but happy, Thomas brought his trucks into the station. The station master greeted him and thanked Thomas for bringing the train over. Thomas was told he could spend the night in the main shed and then start shunting the following morning. As Thomas drifted off to sleep, he wondered what would happen in the morning.
I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I'm moving from here, there, everywhere, and I can't believe I'm moving trucks. What kind of crazy backwoods railway is this anyway?
Thomas was woken up the next morning to the sound of complaining. He puffed out of the yards and at first couldn't see anyone.
Hey, which way you going?
Called a voice, which made Thomas jump. He was quite surprised what was standing next to him. At first, he thought it was an old mine cart, but it was actually a pump trolley, looking rather flustered. "Oh, hello," said Thomas. I didn't see you there. Is everything all right?"
No, it's not all right.
The pump trolley grumbled.
The engine that usually shunts in this yard has not been seen for 2 days, and no one knows where he is.
"What engine?" asked Thomas.
He's a local round here. They call him Puffing Billy,
replied the pump trolley.
He's one of the oldest engines here. But like I said, no one's seen him around.
"I could find him," suggested Thomas.
Yeah, good luck with that,
said the pump trolley. "No, I really can," said Thomas. "I'm known to be quite useful. What's your name, by the way?"
They call me Squeak,
said the pump trolley.
It's because of my handle. And if you can find Puffing Billy, then best of luck.
"I've been getting a lot of it," muttered Thomas. But he was determined in his mission and puffed away.
Just be sure you're back here before it gets overcrowded with trucks,
shouted Squeak, as Thomas soon left the comforts of Barrow behind him. Thomas was quite nervous as he puffed along the line. "Maybe this wasn't a good idea," said his driver. "I know, Bob," puffed Thomas, "but I can try. I must find this Puffing Billy." "You didn't even ask what he looked like," said the fireman. "How will you find an engine we know nothing about?" "Well, Edward managed to rescue Trevor from scrap," Thomas reminded, "and Percy and I once rescued old Slowcoach. Maybe rescuing this Puffing Billy is something like that." "Just as long as you're careful," said the driver. "We're not on Sodor now." They puffed through an old stone tunnel, and Thomas found that the further he travelled, the colder it became. He was just passing through a junction when a voice called out to him.
Well, I never thought I'd live to see the day.
There, standing next to Thomas, was the strangest locomotive he had ever seen. It was actually a steam-powered rotary snowplow. "Oh, hello," said Thomas, rather stunned. "Who are you?"
They call me Bertha, darling,
replied the snowplow.
And by the looks of things, you're a Northwestern engine. You're a long way from home, ain't you?
"Well, I was," said Thomas, "but I'm looking for... What was his name? Puffing Billy?"
Oh, I know about him, darling,
said Bertha.
He passed through here 2 days ago. He was with Smoke.
"Smoke?" said Thomas. "That's a funny name for a steam engine."
Oh, Smoke ain't no steam engine, honey,
said Bertha.
Between you and me, he's the nastiest diesel you'll ever meet. He's not hard to find. He's got a huge scar across one of his eyes, covered by an eye patch. Years ago, a goods train ran into him and almost dented him. And ever since, he's had a hatred for steam engines. He owns an industrial yard not too far down the line.
"Is it far?" asked Thomas.
Just keep following that track, darling, and you'll be all right,
said Bertha.
But do be careful. Some engines that go up there don't ever come out.
I'll be careful, reassured Thomas. He pumped his pistons and set off.
Do be careful, honey,
called Bertha as Thomas continued on his way. Thomas travelled as far as he could. Every time he turned a corner, he hoped that the industrial yard that Bertha had told him about would be right in front of him, but it didn't appear on his first corner or his second. It was the third corner that caught Thomas by surprise. He could make out the large chimneys of the industrial yard through the tall trees, and he was shocked by it all. Who would bring a steam engine here? He wondered. Beats me, replied the driver, but let's hope this Puffing Billy's here. We've got this far, agreed the fireman. There's no turning back now. Well, there's only one way to find out, said Thomas. He braced himself for what would come and puffed carefully and casually into the industrial yard. The yard was crawling with diesels. Some were working hard, others were on the lookout for intruders. It didn't take Thomas long to identify which one was Smoke. He was a large black diesel with a silver roof and stripes. He had a spiked eye patch across his left eye, and a thick scar could be seen underneath. Bertha wasn't joking, Thomas said to himself. He looks menacing. But luckily for Thomas, Smoke, and none of the diesels for that matter, had noticed him. Very carefully, Thomas puffed from warehouse to storage shed. He was almost caught out by Smoke, who thought he'd heard a noise, grunted when he hadn't, and scuttled away. Phew, said Thomas. He continued searching until he found himself in front of what he thought was a smelting shed. When he did, Thomas was in for another surprise. Standing near the shed, but not on the rails, was the oldest looking locomotive he had ever seen. He had a golden monocle around his eye, and a sign was placed on his buffer beam. "Do not move," it read in capital letters. The engine was fast asleep. "Excuse me," Thomas whispered. The engine didn't stir. Excuse me," Thomas puffed again. The engine woke. What? What's going on here? Who disturbs me slumber?" "I'm sorry," said Thomas. "Are you Puffing Billy?" "Yeah, that's right. Puffing Billy. The oldest engine in all of England. At least that's what I think anyway. Who are you? You're not a diesel." "No, I'm not. My name's Thomas," he said. "I had originally come to do the shunting in Barrow, but I heard that you'd gone missing and—" "A rescue operation, is it?" said Puffing Billy, rather impressed. "Well, Thomas, you've certainly risked a lot to come and find me." "Bertha pointed me in the right direction," said Thomas. "Oh, good old Bertha," smiled Puffing Billy. "She's a good in that one. Anyway, we must hurry. You know what the diesels are like around here." Thomas agreed. Puffin Billy's crew were not too far away. They, along with Thomas's driver and fireman, worked fast to re-rail the old engine. By the time Puffing Billy was back on the rails, Thomas had turned around. "Here we go," he said to himself. The two engines braced themselves for the challenge ahead. They had just left the sanctuary of Puffin Billy's area when...
"Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo!
shouted a passing diesel.
Yoo-hoo! A steamer's escaping! Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo!"
All of the diesels in the industrial yard were on alert, but none were quicker than Smoke. When he saw Thomas darting out of the yards with Puffing Billy in tow, he charged for them.
"Come back here!"
He bellowed.
That heap of scrap belongs to me.
Actually, it belongs to Barrow, but good luck with that, Thomas shouted back. He pumped his pistons and started to go faster. Whoa, steady on, lad, called Puffing Billy. I'm not as young as I once was. But Thomas was trying to avoid Smoke, who was now giving chase.
Give me back my engine, you little blue runt,
he shouted. Thomas tried to go faster, but at first it was impossible. Smoke started to gather speed. What are we going to do? Shouted Thomas. I've got it, Puffing Billy said. There's a junction not too far ahead. I'm sure we can avoid him. How? Said Thomas. Leave it to me, said Puffing Billy. Smoke chased Thomas and Puffing Billy for almost another mile before the junction Puffing Billy had spoken of came into view. Thomas charged under it, whistling furiously. Points! Puffing Billy shouted. The signalman, witnessing the chase, knew exactly what to do. As Thomas and Puffing Billy charged under the signal canopy, the points changed. Smoke was too distracted with the chase to even notice. When he realized that the points had been changed for him, it was too late.
No!
He cried. Smoke was diverted into an unused siding. At the end of it, a brick wall stood in his path.
Oh, this is going to hurt,
he groaned. And of course it did. Smoke hit the wall with a loud crash. The impact was so powerful, Smoke broke right through it. His buffer beam was dented, one of his cab windows was cracked, and his engine sputtered to a stop. All Smoke could do was watch Thomas and Puffin' Billy disappear into the distance. By the time one of the diesels from the industrial yard came to collect him, Smoke was a battered, bruised, and defeated engine. A little later, Thomas had finished all the shunting in the yards of Barrow. Squeak had also helped and was quite grateful. Thomas was just finishing up ready to head home when a shrill whistle was heard. Topped up with coal and now cleaned and polished was Puffing Billy. You look much better, puffed Thomas. It wouldn't have been possible without you, Puffing Billy said. I can't thank you enough, Thomas. You risked everything for me. It's the least I can do, said Thomas. I don't think Smoke will be a problem to anyone for a long time, Puffing Billy agreed. Thomas beamed. Just then, the Barrow station master arrived. Ah, Thomas, he said, the Fat Controller's just been on the telephone. I told him how you were able to bring Puffin' Billy safely back home. He is very proud of you and has a special surprise when you come home. He's expecting you right this moment. Yes, sir, said Thomas. Well, goodbye, Thomas, said Puffin' Billy. Until we meet again. Goodbye, Puffin' Billy, said Thomas, and be safe. Soon, Thomas was leaving the yards of Barrow and heading back to the island of Sodor. As it had been when Thomas first travelled up to Barrow, the sun was just setting when he returned to the island of Sodor. All the engines and the Fat Controller were waiting for him at Tidmouth Sheds, and they gave him a hero's welcome. The Fat Controller was very proud of Thomas, so much so that Thomas would be allowed to take trains to the mainland more often, but would still go as far as Barrow. Over the next couple of days, Thomas never forgot about his mainland adventure. He never forgot Puffing Billy, he never forgot Squeak, and he never forgot Bertha. But what about Smoke? Well, his industrial yard was shut down. Some of the diesels had even come forward to call him out on his behaviour, and they went to find new jobs, which they mostly enjoyed. And as for Thomas, he believes that it will be a long time before another mainland adventure came his way.